Let's finish off the Saurus Warrior from the Seraphon army today on the fresh tips. Hello, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we are going to continue our work on the Saurus Warrior Alpha from the new Seraphon army, and today we're finishing off all the little details on the model as well as the base. To get things started, we're going to use Imperial Fist Citadel contrast paint just to get things started. Any yellow paint would do. I just used the contrast because, well, it was sitting on my shelf and I hardly ever use it. And this is one of the newer formulations of the Citadel contrast paint, and it covers really well and gets into the little nooks and crannies. And I kind of like the coverage, and so I used it. And I thought, you know what? It did a pretty darn good job. It gives you both, the shade and the highlight. A Sermon Blue is next, and we're going to use this. And very carefully, we're going to draw this up towards the, basically the base of the feather, where the stem is. I don't know. What is that part called on a feather that connects up to the bird? We're going to use some contrast medium because I laid it out initially from the pot, and I wasn't happy with the coverage as I was feathering it out. I was getting really bad tide mark, so I decided on using 2 drops of medium, 1 little drop of Sermon Blue, and then begin glazing this in on these areas. Now, you may or may not notice, but as we lay this light blue on top of the yellow, guess what? It makes green. Yes, I know. Ooh, some advanced color theory for you all, I know. As we layer this thinned out layer of blue down, we're going to allow it to build up to give us more blue at the end, but allow for a transition of a light green through the rest. I'm going to switch over to a detail brush here and just concentrate more up towards where it connects up to the little mounting point and the little gemstone that mounts up to the staff, as well as the little spine on the feather as well. We're going to make sure that that is more pronounced, and you can see we're building up saturation and building towards that really intense blue towards the base of the feather. And then here I'm just simply laying in some little lines in there just to indicate. Doomfire Magenta is next. This is Citadel Contrast. We're going to use some contrast medium, just a drop and a little bit of the contrast medium or contrast paint itself. Give it a nice thorough mixing until it is on, you see no marbling, and then we're going to glaze in this little layer. Now this is a magenta, so this is quite bright, and on top of the yellow, guess what? It makes red. Yes, I know. Ooh, we're really exploding brains today, aren't we? Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to lay in a couple layers down at the tip just to draw in some more saturation. And then I also create some little lines in there just for the indication of the little feathers. As anybody who's seen any kind of feathers knows that there's little breaks and such on the feathers. And again, it just creates texture and just keeps it kind of interesting. Really, these kind of feathers, I'm imagining something like, some sort of tropical bird or whatever, right? Terminus Stone is next. This is Citadel Dry. I'm going to use a small dry brush. We're going to dunk it in, wipe off all of that paint, as you can see here, and very, very lightly, we're going to draw the brush in a left to right type of motion. So we're trying to avoid hitting any of the spear or any other details like that. And with a very, very light hand, we're just allowing the paint to gather on that outer edge, as well as catching some of that spine in the middle of the feather. I call it a spine in the feather. I don't know. What is that? Anybody who knows feather anatomy, feel free to let me know what that detail is called on a feather. That little spine, I don't know what it is. Rib? No, it's not rib. Come on. Once that's done, we're going to switch over to some ceramite white. Slap that onto the palette. We're going to use our standard brush here as it draws to a nice point, and we're just the dampness of the brush to thin the color out, and we are going to base coat all the little gemstone areas on the model. Now, initially, I was going to paint these up as gemstones, but then decided against it. And anybody who wants to paint them up like gemstones, just do the opposite of what I've done here. So we did the eyes, the little stones, as well as the 2 little marks on the shield. I did not paint the eyes as I like those staying on blue. And you can see the little orbs around the armor and everything like that. So yeah, well, these are going to all get colored in a sort of amber. That's the color we're going to go for, as the yellow really stands out with all that nice brown, as well as the turquoise as well. Bad Moon Yellow Citadel Contrast is next. I chose this simply because this is the bright yellow and it covers really well. This is a new formulation of the contrast paint, so it is very, very opaque almost. And it covers very, very nicely, goes right into the recesses. It does everything you want it to do. And the reason for going for the brightest is that we are going to build downwards on the color. Now, after this layer, and I also applied into the eyes, and I allow it to saturate somewhat heavily in the eye sockets, as I was initially gonna do a bit of an OSL type thing, object source lighting in the eyes to make them like they're glowing, but I thought, we can cover that another day in another video. I just wanted some intense light in the eyes. Imperial Fist is next. We're returning to this, and this is going to begin our shading process around all these little yellow details. Now, if you're going to go for a gemstone effect, build these darker colors upwards. So the higher portions of these little details, build it up. I'm building them downwards because I'm not really going for a gemstone look, as I'm kind of going more of like a like a yellow stone, like jasper or jade, like a yellow jade. So that's the kind of idea I was going for initially here. I could have just as easily have gone for a gemstone effect and going for a translucency, but I decided against it, as we've demonstrated that one plenty of times, and I just really kind of wanted to hurry up and get this model finished, as plenty more projects awaiting. Gryph-hound Orange is next. Contrast medium. We're gonna add about 2 drops onto the palette, maybe 3, just 2, and about halfway up the brush. Now the brush I typically use for gathering paint is a shade wash brush, for anybody who's wondering. I only use that because it's a big brush. It gets beat up. I'm not too worried about making sure that it comes to a fine point, as it is the kind of brush that you just basically slap it onto the surface of a model. It just gives you a bit more control. And as you can see with this Gryph-hound Orange thinned out, I'm applying it on the bottom half of each of these little yellow details. Again, creating the shadow, going for that slight translucency, and of course, because it is a yellow transitioning into an orange, that's giving us that impression that it is more of an amber quality. On the eye sockets, I trace the outer portions of the eyelid, or the eye socket, building towards the helmet and towards the back of the eye. The reason, just because it just looked kind of cool, and I wanted to create that illusion of a gradient in that space. We're going to come back with some Gryph-hound Orange right out of the pot, switching over to our detail brush, and with this, we're just going to put in a fine shadow line along the bottom portions of each of these areas. This is a very, very minimal amount of paint that we're going to use, which is why we're using a detail brush. It will flow right like you basically are writing with this. You can basically write letters with the contrast paint in this concentration using a detail brush. You can do all sorts of amazing things with this paint in this consistency. So don't be afraid to use contrast paint in other ways that it wasn't quite designed or intended for. These are just water-based acrylic paints, no different than, water-based acrylic inks or anything like that. You can do all sorts of stuff. It's just really the matter of consistency. That's all. Uriel Yellow is next. Uriel Yellow is next. Lamian Medium. We're going to throw 2 drops down onto the palette, and then we're going to take a somewhat healthy amount of Uriel Yellow just to thin it down. Now with this, I did want this a little bit closer towards a glaze consistency, as I'm going to resaturate the area and push some of that orange back a bit in any areas that I felt that it was just a little too intense and went a little too far up the surface. I wanted that gradient to be a lot finer and more of that yellow body to be more present on each of these little details, especially on the little gemstone on the staff. Now the gemstone on the staff and the big gemstone on the forehead on the shield, those have little facets on them. So we're going to have to be a little bit more deliberate as we apply highlights onto those areas. But all the little round orby things around the rest of the model, yeah, it's fair game. The edge paint Dorn Yellow is next. I'm going to slap a little bit onto my palette. We're going back to our detail brush, just the dampness of the brush, just to thin the color out ever so slightly. And we're going to apply about 1/4 of the paint on the upper portion of each of these little orby details around the model. Again, this is just a highlight, so we're painting these like we would any other regular opaque surface. We're not going for a gemstone, but if you were doing a gemstone, you would do this in the opposite order. So this Dorn Yellow would be on the bottom portion of the gemstone. I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but Trust me, it works. Snakebite leather, citadel contrast medium. We're going to throw 2 drops down, maybe 3. Let's do 3. And halfway up the brush, we're going to use some of that snakebite leather, thin it way down, and this is going to push all that yellow towards the brown. Now, I used snakebite leather. I could have also used Argyros Dunes or the other one. Even Skeleton Horde would have worked as well, because these browns have a nice yellow quality, and I want to knock some of that intensity down a bit, and I want the orange to push more towards browns as well, but still have that orange present. So that's why we're thinning this down and applying it. And because it's snakebite leather, if we apply it fairly generously around the surface, especially around the perimeter of where the stones mount up to the armor, it creates a really wonderful outline, and it basically is giving you all your options right then and there in one brush stroke and making it really, really easy. Black Legion is next. We could also use Abaddon Black as well, and I'm just simply painting the mounting points where the gemstone and the feathers meet up to the staff, as well as the little trinket that dangles from the staff as well. You may or may not notice that I also did the ropes before as well, and those were snakebite leather as well. Rune Fang Steel is next, just a little bit on the palette. Fine detail brush. We're just going to reinforce some of these highlights around some of the areas, as well as the clasps that hold the feathers and the gemstone. We're also going to reestablish the helmet around the eye. A lot of yellow got around the edge, the perimeter, just because of the way I was, working the paint into the details. So I ended up nicking some of the areas of the helmet that I didn't quite want, as the yellow was just a little too present, and also some edge details on the back spikes and some of the armor plate, stuff like that. I go around and just reestablish some of those highlights in there and just basically bringing them forward and refining some of these extra little details. Also like the bracelets as well and stuff like that. I just went around and just quickly did a little edge highlight on those as well, just to really bring those back out. Croxagore Scales is next, contrast medium. We're going to throw about 2 drops, maybe 3, onto the palette, and we're going to mix some Croxagore Scales in. And this is just simply shade the armor where the facet of where the eyes are. And I wanted this because the eye is really intense and the silver is really, really bright under certain angles of the light. And the contrast medium, or the contrast paint itself, Croxagore Scales, will knock that saturation and that brightness down a bit and make that eye pop all the more, especially since it's surrounded in that turquoise, which is a nice blue-green. Works really well with the yellow-orange. We're going to use some white scar next, detail brush, and we're just going to put a final spot highlight on each of these little areas. Now, if we were doing this as a gemstone, we would still put this white dot on the highest point, on the most northern portion of each of those little details, just to complete the illusion. Whereas here, I'm simply just catching some of these edges. Now, like I said, on the shield there, on that gemstone, and the gemstone that dangles from the spear, they have little facets, so I'm just catching those little edges. And with the dampness of the brush, thinning the color out a little bit, you can pretty much draw with it, and it will achieve the desired result that you want to go for. Steel Legion Drab is next. We're going to begin work on the base. And with this, just the dampness of the brush to thin the color out, and we're going to apply this over the little stone detail that the model's standing on, as well as the edge rim, as well as the main face of the base as well. So again, it's just really, really straightforward. I do apply 2 layers along the rim of the base. The rim of the base will be Steel Legion Drab, just because, it's the typical thing to do these days using Steel Legion Drab. I think everybody would have probably turned the video off if I used Goblin Green or something like that on the rim. So, not to upset anybody. Very carefully here, I just simply work the paint into all these little areas, give it a few moments to dry, and then we will move on to the next step. You can see here, we're just simply catching that rim. Again, with the color thinned out, just the dampness of the brush, it flows very, very smooth, but you can see once it dries, you'll still see some of that primer kind of showing through, and we really don't want that. Storm Vermin Fur, Steel Legion Drab, we're going to mix these in a 1-to-1 mix ratio, and we're going to apply this on the stone. Now, we're going to catch the high points of the stone, and I'm not being too concerned about being too precise where I apply this color. It's not quite like a highlight color. I just wanted some variation on the stone. And with this, I just wanted to use my standard brush just to make sure I didn't hit any other areas of the model. I'm not worried if I hit any of the flat areas of the base, as that's going to get covered over anyway. So again, I just wanted some variation in the stone. I wanted it to be not quite as saturated brown. Storm Vermin Fur is next, all on its lonesome, and this is going to be applied more like a highlight. So I'm just going to apply this on the upper portion as well as along the edges and some of the main faces of the stone that you can kind of see, some of the details and everything like that. There's a root on the base around that rock, and we're going to pick that out here in a moment. Longbeard Gray is next, Citadel Dry, small dry brush. And yes, we're just going to dunk it in real quick, and then we're just going to very, very lightly catch the stone that the Saurus Warrior is standing on. And it's just really, really fast. There's nothing terribly complex here. Not any big brush strokes, just looking for the edges, really just the leading edge and just on the back portion, just bring that texture forward. Cygor Brown is next, undiluted Cygor Brown, and we're just going to catch this little vine. Cygor Brown I could have used Wildwood as well. Wildwood might have actually been a better choice, as Cygor Brown does finish really, really dark on a model. It almost looks black, but it is, and to the eye, it is a brown. But on camera, it looks almost black here. But yeah, it's a good brown. I like Cygor Brown's a great color. Agrilian Earth, the texture paint. We're going to use the little texture brush from Citadel to apply this. I like this little tool. It makes this kind of work handy, and it's pretty much the only thing I use it for, other than maybe glue ups and stuff like that. And with this, we are going to apply a fairly generous amount of this technical paint onto the base. This is basically a color with a crackle medium in it. And you can see we applied it fairly heavily on the base, and I also kind of like a spatula it around and get a nice little texture going, and that's just to create variation and everything like that. But you can apply it fairly generously and it will crack really nicely, as you can see there. Athonian Camel Shade is next. I like this color for doing bases and other kind of ruins and things of that nature, because it's got a nice green color as well as a brown quality as well. It's almost like if you mixed the Dark Angel's green with the Agrax Earthshade kind of thing. And in fact, you probably could just do that as well. I'm applying this on the base and applying it on top of the Agrilian Earth, as I want to create the illusion of some various texture on that surface, maybe moss where there's green gathering, anything like that. It's just, again, just to create variation, break that base up, not make it look so generic, essentially. Terminus Stone is next, Citadel Dry, small dry brush. Put a lot onto the brush, there's a little too much there actually, and we're going to wipe a lot of it off the brush, and then very carefully we're going to dry brush the Agrilian Earth right on top of the Athonian Camel Shade. This is, of course, after the Athonian Camel Shade has thoroughly dried. Basically, I use a hair dryer to speed up the process between all this, so that I'm not sitting here all day waiting for this, and waiting for the Agrilian Earth actually took quite a while as well, because you apply it fairly thick, but you get some really good deep cracks in it if you apply it fairly heavily. So bear that in mind. If you want good deep cracks, yeah, you gotta apply it fairly thick. We're gonna use some Gamer's Grass. These are little grass tufts, and they got like little leaf qualities. It's a little bit like a jungle-like quality. I'm gonna use some PVA glue. I just slap a little bit onto my palette. I'm gonna use an old, tired Citadel brush to apply the glue. And you can see the brush has like no bristles to it, so it's pretty sad. But I'm gonna use tweezers, and I'm just gonna grab a large tuff and apply it right here on the base. It doesn't have to be perfect or wherever, and I didn't have to apply it right directly in the middle of where I had applied some Agrilian or Athonian Camel Shade, and apply one small tuft on the back. Again, just for visual variation. I also very carefully come back and pick out some of those stray hairs and some of those stray little branches in there, just kind of groom it up and make it look kind of fluffy, and it looks like jungle, dried earth with grass tufts hanging out and everything like that. But that is it. That is the Saurus Warrior Alpha from the Seraphon army for Age of Sigmar. Holy Kermole, this has been a journey. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying this. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and all of that. And yeah, because that all helps the channel. And hopefully you guys have had a lot of fun following along with this. I would like to see what kind of efforts you have all taken from this, and if you've employed any of the techniques that I've shown in this series, please feel free to tag me or use the hashtag #WayOfTheBrush on any of the socials that you use. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this and follow along. Big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below. And a huge thank you everybody for their support and all you brand new ones and everybody's continued support. Take care of your brushes, they'll take care of you, and I will see you in the next tutorial.